Hello, welcome back to Cindy's Library. This is Cindy. Well, I have some good news and some bad news. Good news is I have chosen a new computer. I actually did that several weeks ago now. The bad news is I got a notice this week saying that the shipment of my new computer has been delayed till the end of the month. So we're just going to have to do the best we can without that. But in the meantime, let's talk about September because September was a wonderful reading month. So let's see what we've got here. I read, or rather listened to, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, this is not the easiest book. I'll be the first to admit it, but well worth it. So much mythology in here, and some of my favorite Tolkien stories have their basis in here. And, well, I'm planning on doing a full review of this, so look forward to it. But for all you Tolkien fans who have yet to tackle the Silmarillion, or have failed to tackle the Silmarillion, I have resources that can help. So, there is that. Oh, I also finished North and South. I'd forgotten how much I truly enjoy this one, which means I have read all of Elizabeth Gaskell's major novels in the past year. So, hopefully, soonish, I will be able to do a ranking video. But in the meanwhile, it's a little bit like Pride and Prejudice. You have Margaret Hale. She grew up in the south of England. When she wasn't in London, she was in the countryside at her father's parish, where he was a curate. He decides, though, that he can no longer be a part of the Church of England and therefore loses his job. Therefore, they have to move, and they end up in Milton, a northern manufacturing town, which is extremely different from what Margaret Hale is used to, as is Mr. Thornton, who is quite rough around the edges, but also quite intelligent. He basically worked his way up from the bottom. And, well, let's just say they come off rather Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy-ish, as far as that goes. But beyond that, we get examinations of some of the differences between North and South. We see what a manufacturing town is like. Elizabeth Gaskell is quite even-handed, actually, in examining the conditions of workers, but also looking at the constraints the masters are under. And so, well worth reading. Glad I did. Let's see, I also read Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is about an artificial friend named Clara. She starts out in this shop for AFs, and she ends up getting chosen by this girl. Actually, it sounds she's more like a teenager. Probably a fairly young teenager when they start, to be her AF. So Clara is extremely observant, and so this is her learning about the world outside of the AF shop, learning about Josie and her family, and why Josie is sick and all of the ramifications of that. Surprisingly deep. I'm going to need to reread this one to really think about it again. But quite a lot to think about in this one. I'm glad I read it. And what can I say? I enjoyed Village School so much by Miss Reed that I reread it. But I talked about that, I think, in August, so we won't need to revisit it, except to say that Green Acre Village is as charming as ever. I also read first The Life and Faith of Emma Smith by Jennifer Reeder. Now, Emma Smith, she was the wife of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so just based on that, you can imagine she had a pretty interesting and complicated life. Oh. In the end, I am left with the impression that she was an amazing woman, truly an elect lady. Some very difficult decisions in some places, and I think she did the best she knew how. Excellent book to learn about Emma Smith. Let's see, what else? Oh, Mrs. Lincoln's Dressmaker by Jennifer Chiverini. So this is the story of Manchuista, I think that's how you say it. It's a dressmaker, but an extremely capable and fancy dressmaker. She's a former slave who bought her freedom living in D.C. She's been there a little bit, enough to have established a clientele. And the Civil War breaks out, and through various contacts, she ends up as Mrs. Lincoln's dressmaker. And so she ends up hearing and seeing many things that most people wouldn't see. Not that she sees anything very secret per se, as far as state secrets or anything like that. She rarely knows much more than the average person in Washington, D.C. about what's going on in the Civil War. But as far as private life, she does see some things. And what's interesting, this, at least it starts out as a Civil War novel from a civilian perspective, which is kind of interesting. We don't always get that. The people who are left behind in DC while the soldiers are out fighting below in the fields and hills and mountains of Virginia. And of course, there's other things going, but that's of most concern to people of DC, considering how close the fighting can get sometimes. And so, yeah, it's historical fiction. Our protagonist is based on a real person who really was Mrs. Lincoln's dressmaker. So, very interesting. Glad I read it. And then I also read Imagineer and Excantation by Honor Raconteur. That's a duology. It's our world, but there really is magic and magic creatures and such, mostly hiding in plain sight or trying to live safely in protected areas if they can't blend in so easily. Our protagonist starts seeing glimpses of this world and then more than glimpses one day, and she discovers she is an Imagineer. That is different from a witch or a wizard or a magician or anything like that, in that it's basically based all on imagination. Whatever she can imagine can happen. And so instead of incantations and lots of things like that, she is learning about the properties of various physical substances, like a pillow. How does fabric work? How does stuffing work? So that when she imagines it, she can imagine it as realistically as possible. And well, a lot of it is discovering this new world and her new abilities. I will say, though, one of the major things that really uh, gets emphasis, well, we know about it in part one, but really it's the focus of the second book, is there was once a thing called the hub, which would allow people and creatures and such to safely travel between two different points. Say you wanted to go from London to Hong Kong. There would be this network tied up to the hub. It might take you 2 hours to get to the hub from London, and then maybe another 2 or 3 hours to get from the hub back to Hong Kong, your destination. So, but the hub has been not in use for over a century since it was breaking down. No one really understands or knows why the hub was shut down, but it's caused lots of problems. Magical people and creatures that can pass for normal, that's well enough. They can use regular transportation, and a few, like druids, have their own methods, but for most, that means they're pretty stuck, and sometimes in extremely isolated areas that are hard to get to. So those are those adventures. I also read The Potion is the Bomb by Honor Raconteur. So yes, we are back to Henry Davenport and Jamie, the magical detectives. And this time, there is indeed a bomb. There are 2 victims. One died, one is in extremely critical condition, and a bomb went off, and people are trying to figure out who would want to do this, especially since they were working on a serum to cure tuberculosis. So, Henry and Jamie are back on the case. Quite enjoyable as always. Then finally, I also read Bastille versus the Evil Librarians by Brandon Sanderson and Jaunci Patterson. So Brandon Sanderson, he started the Alcatraz series years ago. The adventures, if not misadventures, of the boy Alcatraz, whose gift is breaking things. But the more we go into this series, the more we do discover it does have a side where it really is a break. It really is a gift in the right circumstances. Beyond that, I can't say very much except that book 5 ended quite disastrously, and Alcatraz refuses to write anything else. So in this final installment, Bastille picks up the pen, aside from a couple of asides from Alcatraz. So that is why there's a co-author on this one. If you've been following the series, well worth the wait. Without any spoilers, I can say very satisfying ending. So that was how my September went. And I hope your September went as well. We're halfway into October already. Still several weeks at least before I get my new computer, so hopefully it will come when they say this time. Meantime, thank you so much for stopping by. I'll try and keep you updated this way in the meantime. And I hope until next time we all are safe and healthy. And as always, happy reading!